All right, another week. I guess we're up to week 6 now. One thing I wanted to talk about, first off, I got an email from a student, and a lot of times students will send me emails, which, I appreciate, but sometimes I try to answer them in the lecture too, because if one person has a question, probably a lot of people have a question. There was a couple, just the gist of the question had to do with employee stock purchase programs. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later in the course, but I'll talk about it again right now. A lot of times when your company, if it's a publicly traded company, so you're working for a big corporation, they may have an employee stock purchase program. And what you want to look at is what the details, the parameters of it are. One of the companies I work for has one of those programs, and I buy the max I can in their program that comes with a discount. So whatever, I think I put aside 10% of my salary. Now I've got whatever different investments and stuff coming out of the rest of my salary. So that 10%, because I do what I say in terms of pay myself first. My retirement money's already coming out of there, and the rest of it. So that 10% is actually money that I kind of sort of need. But the way I do the employee stock purchase program, which I'm sure they're not huge fans of, that being the company, is as soon as possible they take it out every paycheck every month, and at the end of each quarter, so every 3 months, they put it in my account and they reflect that I have those shares under my name. And one of the incentives to get people to do this is, number one, they don't have any charges associated with it, which is a would be a red flag. If a company has excessive charges, most stock purchases now, if you're just going to buy Ford Motor Company or something like that, um, Ameritrade, Fidelity, everybody who you'd want to deal with, the big companies, they've gone to zero commission. So if you're being charged a sales charge, that would be sort of a red flag. So why would you do it? Well, the reason I do it is because they give me a 5% discount on the shares I buy. So I, did a little math and figured out if, the granted the stock could go up or down in price, but if I get the stock and sell it, that 5% works out to be $700 a year that I kind of consider an extra chunk of my salary now. And now again, if I have to do this over the course of 3 months, I can't sell it till the end of the quarter. But let's say the stock price is fairly stable, I will make $700 on that. Now, there's a couple reasons why I don't keep the stock. Is number one, the company I work for is not the type of investment that I would be that interested in. They're a large established company, and they, don't have that much, movement in the stock. I usually look for smaller ones, and it's just, I'm more um, aggressive than this company. The other thing that I think is probably the most valid point is, let's say you're working for General Motors and you're doing some sort of employee stock purchase program, and you've got your job tied up in General Motors, maybe your pension's tied up in General Motors, and now you got General Motors stock. You're not diversified at all. So even in my situation, not that the company I work for would ever go out of business, but I don't like the fact that I have my employment and my investments in the same thing. Now they would look at me, but granted there's thousands of employees, but they might have some measures in place, some disincentives where they charge me fees to prevent me from selling the stock. But I think it's perfectly valid and prudent not to want to hold stock in the company I work for, because I don't want all my eggs in one basket. The other question was talking about savings, and well, there was also a bit in there about how to select stocks, and that's really a broader subject, but it's really interesting. But how to go about selecting stocks, and also where to sort of park your money for your emergency fund when you're either using it in the emergency fund or you're using money that you're going to, you know, perhaps purchase some stock when you find the stock you like. And typically that will be put into some sort of money market fund. Now, again, the interest rates on a money market fund is typically comprised of government securities. So the interest rates are not exciting and not really even relevant. I mean, I believe me, I guess some right and some wrong, but again, I don't do it all on my own. But that Shopify stock that I was touting that was up 800%, it's now up 1100%. So, if I'm getting point zero something from some money market fund, as long as this market keeps going, and again, some of you may be a little whatever, may not be this aggressive, but for the time being, the stock market is still on a upward tear, and I don't want to have money in cash. But that's me. That's a little different. Now, I would argue though that most of you probably should take a little more risk than you're inclined to because, again, keeping things in a very safe, again, going back to the government securities, that's, you're sitting on the porch and the inflation is eating up the buying power of your savings. So there needs to be a balance. And one of the other things too, and why I end up with pretty aggressive stocks is a couple things. One, my strategy is in the stock market to be pretty aggressive. But when I do make money, um, I tend to sell those stocks and put them in real estate, and real estate being very stable. So overall, my portfolio is kind of medium, but it's just the stock part looks like I'm very aggressive. And then lastly, for most everybody, you don't need to get into individual stocks. It's you've got your life to live, you got other things going on. You're probably much better off just to put them in mutual funds, which we'll talk about later. Mutual funds are still in the stock market, but they're a collection of stocks, so it's more of a diversification. The reason why I would be in stocks, I'm in stocks, is mainly for the psychological benefit of it, because I will put more money towards investing if I do it in stocks. If mutual funds, are probably not the most exciting thing to do. And so I'd probably be limited to, about 10%, and then I'd want to spend the money somewhere else. Um, you know, in stocks, you're borderline speculation where you're, it's almost like a gambling type thing. So I tend to put more money into it. So that's kind of convoluted logic, but that's why I'm in stocks rather than mutual funds. And then I use a lot of subscription services and different research things to get advice to figure out, what stocks to buy. And again, there's not always winners, but all you need is a few good ones. All right. So now jumping in the chapters, we're going to talk about personal loans. Okay, so personal loans, yeah, a lot of times large purchase, financial institution, banks, whatever. We know that everything kind of crosses, apart. Finance companies, again, this is a financial planning course, and the plan didn't go so well if you're at a finance company. Those are the ones that are kind of like your rent to own kind of companies and places like that are going to charge confiscatory rates. But credit unions, savings, and regular old banks. Um, I don't like the term commercial banks because it makes it sound like the banks that work with Wall Street. But again, just be in mind, they're keep in mind in this case they're talking about, maybe Wells Fargo or Bank of America. There's a whole nother level of business banks that don't really exist for individuals. They're more for corporations. And then also you can borrow money from family, friends. Now we'll get into co-signing, which is a very bad practice. Okay, peer-to-peer lending. So you guys know more about this kind of stuff. Some of the things that have popped up where it's microloans. Like I mentioned before, it's very hard to get a loan for a new business because you represent quite a bit of risk to the banks, and so there are some people. It's sort of like a Shark Tank thing, but rather than being just one big investor, some big angel investor, this is a consolidation of a bunch of small investors. So I have had friends come up to me and tell me they're doing great work, and they're on the lending side. They give these folks some money, and these guys loan it back out to people, and they do it a bunch of micro loans to kind of provide some diversification to them. So, they're in $5 or $10 chunks in any one company, so that they um, don't lose. Anyway, this stuff can get very interesting. Lending Club, Prosper, I think Cabbage may be one of those. As a business owner, I get this stuff all the time, but again, you know, depending on what you're doing, for me, most of my stuff's in agriculture. So I'll try and get, agriculture is deemed by, the state and federal government as a societal good. So I can usually do better in that government sector for those types of loans. Also, I tend to be maybe a little more cautious, just knowing the track record of most businesses. I don't want to get in over my head. If I've had some great business ventures that I thought, this is a killer one, and absolutely no consumer demand. Whereas other stuff that just, I didn't quite, something I started, I didn't quite realize the demand. So sometimes it's hard to guess, and there's, you can't argue with what the consumers want. So I don't want to, get involved in a bunch of loans that are going to eliminate my future opportunities. So anyway, loans 1,000 to 35,000, so not huge amounts of money, but um, maybe it's something to get you a food truck or something like that. If you're going that angle, this would be small startups, and that would probably be a likely place to get that kind of stuff. So again, they'll go by your credit report and your FICO score. Um, Sensible, yep, sacrificing future earnings. So you really got to look at that, the budget. It's very fun to buy things, but it's very unfun to have to pay them off, especially things like vehicles. Everybody doesn't mind paying top dollar for a brand new car, but when it's still 5 or 6 years old and you're still got payments and now you got maintenance and it's kind of a beater. That's anyway, keep that in mind. Yep, definitely can be dodgy if your income is not steady. Um, how do you do it? So we talked about a couple of these forms before, what you own and your cash flow. So the assets and then the cash flow. All these loan contracts, they need to be standardized, right, per the government. So there's going to be a term called APR, annual percentage rate, that we talked about, so that you can compare loans together. Amortization, that's basically how you make these series of equal payments, right? And the principal is and interest. We'll look at how principal and interest are paid, but the thing to keep in mind in the first portion of the loan, if it's a 30-year loan, the first couple of years you're paying pretty much nothing but interest, which is good because the interest is tax deductible if it's real estate. If it's a personal loan, though, no. So that's not a good thing. Maturity, how long the loan's going to last. Collateral. So collateral is a good thing. That means that the lender, I mean, you go into this thing with good faith, right? You're going to pay off this loan. So you don't mind putting up the collateral. And a collateral, that the difference between secured and unsecured. Secure has collateral behind it. Unsecured is just, your good looks, your signature, your the guy's taking a flyer on your um, you know, that you are going to pay that loan back. If it's a car loans are pretty cheap because there's fairly efficient, repo kind of procedures, and they will just come take it. So they can loan, to people even with questionable credit a car loan, because they have recourse against it. If you run up your credit card, they kind of get screwed. So co-signing. So co-signing is not normally something you want to do. What happens here is, well, let's look at what happens, what the consequences are. If you have a co-signer, you you go to a place, you try to get a loan, and they say, yeah, you don't qualify. Can you get a co-signer? That would be, a parent, a friend, somebody like that who does have good credit, who they will make a loan to, and then they sign off on the loan. And so the problem is that it's sort of both of you have the loan at this point, you're co-signers, but when the primary signer or the originator of this thing, when they can't pay the bill, and let's face it, they weren't qualified for the loan, so there's a pretty high propensity that in the future they won't be able to pay that bill. If you're the bill collector, do you go after the originator? No, that's a waste of time. Time is money. Go after the cosigner. That's the guy who qualified. That's the guy with the money. So, the scenario here is, your once friend kind of flakes out on the loan. Um, you probably don't even know about it because you're not getting the paperwork on it. Now it's in collection and they come to you and they want their money plus all the fees and everything else. And you can't say much because you signed off on it. So, if somebody wants to co sign a loan with me or something, I would rather, hey, how about I just give you, loan you the $500 or whatever individually and you see if you can put a down payment and maybe qualify for the loan now because I don't want to be part of a co-signing situation. Loan applications. So yeah, forms are not so much. Most things are going to be online now. But yeah, they're going to want to know obviously all your data. You give them that social, then they'll run your credit, your income. Do you own your home? Do you rent? Standard stuff. But really, once they get that social, they're going to run your FICO score and they're going to get you. They can figure out kind of what you make and stuff, but they want you to sign off on it. So if you lie to them, they can come back and get you. But a loan application, it depends on, the amount of the loan. A one-page thing, you got off pretty easy. Typically, they're going to be pretty involved. If it's just a credit card, they probably just going to ask three things. Your social, so they can do that FICO score, whether you rent or own a home, and how much you make a year. And then they'll do that. APR, so that's what I was talking about. Annual percentage rate. Standard, right? So it's been around for many years. But, sometimes people will quote you interest rates that have hidden charges or something like that. And that's why when you get a credit card statement, there's all these pages in there. And sometimes the details look a little different. That's because, they have to come clean and they have to comply with the Truth in Lending Act. And that bold type is going to be the actual conditions of the loan. Different banks, yeah, some guys will charge, different costs, financing expenses, and anyway, things can vary widely, um, especially on personal loans. So personal loans are kind of, again, it's we're by saying personal, we're kind of staying away from mortgage loans out of the discussion right now. So there can be a lot of different things going on. What typically, for personal loans for most of you all, you'll probably see them associated with, you know, maybe the credit union's got some special, and they're trying to, sell four wheelers or snow machines or something like that, and sometimes the details can be, the terms can be quite favorable. And maybe they're doing it as a loss leader. Maybe they're trying to generate business. Or maybe, there's a price difference on the um, vehicle or whatever in question. Many times when it's offered directly by, say, the manufacturer, there may be something going on. I've, at one point when I was much younger, drove little Nissan pickups for some silly reason. I just used it as a commuter, but they'd always say, "Oh, they're selling below their cost," and then they'd give me, some I think I always paid cash, but they also had some promotional rate. But it was just a shell game. They were messing around. What Nissan would do is very deceptive. They would bring out this invoice and show me that I'm actually paying less for that vehicle than they paid for it. What they did not tell me, but I knew. I mean, I didn't want to make a scene, but yeah, they get $2,000 back from the factory for every vehicle they sell each year. So they could say they're selling the little truck for they had to pay 10 grand for it, and they're selling it to me for you know 999 whatever. And in essence, they're still making 2 grand on the truck because they get their dealer incentive at the end of the year. And it's anyway, kind of a I don't know. I'm trying to think of a better word than slimy, but slimy seems to fit. Interest rates on personal loans. So here's interest payments, payment of principal. So this isn't huge in these, shorter term, but when you get out to a 30-year, like on a mortgage, these numbers are, you know, quite a bit, quite a bit higher, where the interest is going to be very, very high. You can see even here on a 12-year loan, it goes from being $20 down to about a buck 75. How much money can I spend on a car? So again, cars are just you need to do a lot of research. I'll show you a video of one of the things they do, but again, the car business is anyway. I just don't buy new cars. I just don't deal with it. But I do realize that many of you may have young kids, you've got the weather to deal with, you might live in the valley and you're burning through cars and you don't like to work on things yourself or can't work on things yourself. So it's completely understandable why you want something newer. But again, if outside of divorce is probably the most devastating thing in your personal finance world. But car buying, because car buying, you just keep doing it over and over again and you end up underwater and you end up with it's just a horrible investment. So if you can kind of not get too wrapped up and just kind of buy the car you need rather than the car you want, you'll be better off. But I anyway, hard to say. um, I don't want to go off into many war stories, but you can have some very nice cars, but you you know you almost need two cars at that point. I always had, Dodge Vipers and Corvettes and stuff, and I never lost a dime on them, but I never bought them new either. Um, so we know how that's going to end up in terms of more debt added onto your situation. Selecting the car, insurance will matter. Some of this resale stuff, and I'll talk about Kelly Blue Book and Edmunds. It's kind of unfortunate. These guys, in a perfect world, they would be third party folks that all they do is tell you the value of the car. But the car, the used car industry has kind of figured out that if they bought up some of these smaller companies and made the recommendations themselves and then fed them back to the consumers, they can say, "Oh, this car is worth 20 grand." You just go, "Well, that doesn't look like it." And then they pull out their Edmunds. I don't know about Edmunds, but I do know Kelly Blue Book is owned by dealership syndicate, so kind of sneaky stuff. Repair expenses, certain vehicles are obviously going to be quite a bit higher. You can, there's a pretty extensive car, media press type thing where you can see the reviews, you can see what's going on with different cars. And one of the big things though is look at the depreciation. Um, Certain vehicles may cost, you know, about the same price, but one drops like a rock and one does not. What I've always found is any sort of luxury, the luxury like an Escalade versus a Silverado, the luxury is going to plummet. Jaguar versus a Viper, they both were about the same price new, and the Viper was worth about half the money after whatever number of years, and the The Jaguar is worth about 10-15% after that same number of years. So anyway, a little bit of research and you can figure it out. Insurance the same way, and the financing rate. Again, just keep, look at financing rate. Many times it's better to get financing from your bank or from your credit union before you go on the lot, because many times they will have a promotional rate that they'll offer you, but then they won't dicker on the price. Or they'll offer you a tremendous amount for your trade in, but then they won't come down at all on the vehicle sticker price. What you're concerned with is that price in the middle if you're trading in a car. Obviously, it is a hassle, but if you can sell that car, you know, outright to somebody else, you're going to be better off. But not easy. So Kelly Blue Book, this is just something I pulled up for you. Anyway, Kelly Blue Book's owned by Cox Automotive, a bigger subsidiary. They own cable companies, they own all kinds of stuff. And so it's not like it used to be where Kelly was a independent source of that stuff. Also in Alaska, we're a non-disclosure state, right? So we don't have sales tax for vehicles or limited amounts of sales tax. Someplace like California, they are all about knowing what you bought and sold it for because they want sales tax on it. So it generates a whole bunch of data that could feed into these books. But in Alaska, prices are, it's just the Wild West. I mean, people overpay or underpay all the time. So, and there's not enough volume up here to fill these books out. So I hate to say it, but it is kind of involved. If you're somebody who's a hard charger and wants to do it, a lot of people do buy cars in the lower 48, as you know, and ship them up. But anyway, that's again, you may not have the time on your hands to do that, but you will definitely see a disparity in prices between here and there. Um, Here's what she's going to do. So she's looking at a expected resale, repairs and expenses, and she's trying to make the comparison. All right, so jumping back in, she's looking at different repair expenses, different insurance rates. A lot of times the model you purchase, I way back when I could have had a Cuda or a Challenger, and the Cuda was classified as a sports car, had twice the insurance that the Challenger did at the time. The cars weren't that different, and anyway, I didn't get the Cuda. Would have loved to have a Cuda, but anyway, we're talking way back when. Negotiating the price, comparing some of the, again, my daughter's got a Subaru. Drove it a few times, kind of liked it. I thought, maybe I'll get one of these in Seattle. Called the Subaru dealer in Seattle, and he wouldn't deal with me because he said, no, you have to deal with the Alaska dealer. So that not only turned me off to that dealer, but also to Subaru in general. I don't like those sort of games. Trade-in tactics. I mentioned a little bit about that where they jack around with the price. Either give you a whole bunch for your trade-in, boost you up a little bit, make you feel good about that, and then rip you off a little bit on the car price. Or, they give you come way down on the price and then give you nothing for your trade-in. So sometimes it's better to keep those independent transactions or, maybe negotiate things ahead of time. There's I'm not an emotional kind of person with buying stuff. I usually just get angry and that's the end of it. But if you're one of those people who can kind of be talked into things, yeah, be careful. I learned early in life. I was a salesperson for cable TV, and just a quick story. And I was killing it. I was selling cable TV services in a trailer park, and these people had very little money, but man, they were buying all this junk basically they didn't need. It kind of tore me up conscious wise a little bit, but anyway, I guess I got through it. But then the next month, I had this area that was very affluent, country club, the whole bit. I thought I was just going to kill it. I went there and they were not interested, not one bit. And you really kind for me, it was an education to figure out that oh, the reason why these people have this money is because you know, they don't get buffooned by some idiot like me selling them a bunch of cable that they don't need. It all repeats month after month, and it ends up on the next service. And anyway, I wasn't a big fan of the service, so but I only did it about 3 months altogether. But I definitely learned a lot about psychology and how people buy, and it was sad. So no haggle dealers, yeah. People will say they're no haggle dealers, but in a haggling situation, they don't raise the price, right? So, as much as I don't like haggling, to say I'm a no haggle dealer, well, who benefits from that? Now, if you had a big, you know, one of the big car supermarket kind of things like they have in the lower 48, maybe that makes sense. But up here, you have a few companies that kind of control the market, and anyway, not ideal. Information is valuable. Shop around. Purchasing a car online, you can do that. Sometimes you can even go through banks or whatever that have, kind of prearranged things. But again, try and just recognize that a car is anybody who says car and investment, and is not talking about some classic car. Um, yeah, no. If you're going to overspend on something, do it in real estate, appreciating asset, not a depreciating asset. Financing decisions. So, and have an idea before you go there. Don't get change your mind halfway through. 7 years, a 7-year-old car, that's going to have some maintenance issues if you're driving it much. And so now you've got that in addition to the payment. Car may be worthless. Yep. So here's what they do. That's what, again, I sound, get off my lawn kind of guy, but nothing tears me up more when they say, well, what do you want your payment to be? Well, again, they're implying that I can't do math and figure out that, yeah, I can have a $300 payment, but I got to pay for it for 5 years. So if they want to negotiate on price, let's talk about this price, not the payment price. They prey upon people, and they ask you what you want your payment to be. Leasing, certain cars, I guess BMWs in particular, that are just horrendous in terms of depreciation and maintenance and everything else. Maybe you want to lease, but for most people, unless you've got some business that needs the write-off and all kinds of spin-offs, leasing is usually not a good idea for individuals. So you can't get a lower down payment and then return the car plus some money. Sometimes, they'll look at the mileage, they'll look at the wear and tear, because you're essentially in a long-term rental. So keep in mind, if you trash that car or run up a bunch of miles on it, you may not just be walking away from it at the end. Disadvantages, equity in a car. Yeah, that's not really a thing, so I'm not too worried about that. You're responsible for the maintenance as damages, which I talked about. And again, if you end the lease or drive too many miles. So you've signed into a pretty binding contract. If you're not happy with it, you're sort of stuck. Student loans. So remember when I talked about bankruptcy the last time? Kind of funny. Student loans are not dischargeable, which means you can't just say, "Yeah, I can't afford this anymore. I'm going to declare bankruptcy." Since the federal government got involved, now the federal government does the student loan program, which is anyway less than ideal situation. You can no longer write those off in bankruptcy. Um, so again, go easy with this to the max extent possible. Um, typically defer till you're out of school. Maybe you'll be able to deduct some of it depending on your income. And again, when the government owns the loan, and they kind of own you to a certain extent, so they may affect your voting choices. They may affect your profession. You may there may be some manipulation involved, especially if you've got an ordinance student loan. So the motives are not great. Home equity loan. So one of the options, I said kind of at the end of the spectrum is the finance company, the pawn shop, the payday loan. Um, at the other end of the spectrum, on the good side, those are all those pawn shops. Obviously, that's in the bad side. But on the good side, if you need money for something, and again with a home equity loan, it typically needs to be related to the home, but you can look at the value of your home and what you owe on it, and if you have equity, that means that your home is worth more than you own on it. Then you can take a loan against that, and um, it can be tax deductible. So I've never done a home equity loan, but I definitely prefer to take loans against my 401ks, which are just so easy to do, and um, you we'll talk about in a later section. But comparing the two on a 401k loan, um, you just do it right online. You do have to pay interest, but guess who you pay interest to? Yourself. So granted, that money that you had on that 401k, typically, you've got a 401k and mutual funds or whatever, that money, if you took out, say, 20 grand or something like that, it's not in the market at that point, but the interest that you're paying is being paid to yourself. It's in essence a loan to yourself from yourself, whatever. You're on both sides of the loan. So that's why I have never done home equity. Impact of the credit limit. So, yep, we don't have that volatile of housing market up here, but who knows? I mean, again, I'm very, very bullish, very, optimistic on the economy, and I think it's worked out quite well. But if things, you know, took a definite turn for the South, you could be in trouble on one of those loans. Home equity loans, so interest rate. Um, Up to 100,000 is tax deductible. So, these are ideal for something like, hey, I need a new roof, or I want to put a garage or something like that. I've got a rental house that I need to do kind of both of those things for, and that might be one of the options. On rental property, I have to double check to see, whether that's an option, whether I need to be the owner occupier for it. Payday loans, again. So you had a financial plan, and plans don't always work out. And so now look at you, you're doing a payday loan. These are not people you want to deal with. Cost of financing is outrageous. I mean, that's pretty categorical. That 100% per year. Yeah, drug dealers. I mean, if there's any alternative to this is better. Payday loans are, when you hear the term predatory lending and the rest of it. Now, I'm not against, having loans like that available. I mean, it's a free market thing, and sometimes, you know, some person might actually, do this and pay it back, and I'm all about free will, but this is pushing it. These guys, they really can take advantage of folks. So those are personal loans. Okay, so that could have been for a vehicle, for with the exception of the home equity loan, though none of those were deductible. Um, the auto loan, yeah, that's just kind of a one of those things that happens. It's probably a necessity. Would I pay cash for a vehicle? Not if I could get like a 2% loan against it. If they've got some really great loan program, I'll keep my money invested and take their loan, or not, yeah, take their loan. But anyway, for the most part, though, personal loans are debt to type typically be avoided. Now, in purchasing and financing a home, now we're dealing with considerably more money, and we're dealing with an asset that appreciates. And so, again, I'm more aggressive in this. I told you to forego the fancy car, but I'm not necessarily telling you to, go with the smallest home, because whatever, still live within your means, but I do not mind at all having a mortgage out on a home. So here's some rules of thumb, 10 to 20%, but if you're a veteran, you can get away with a lot of times with zero. If you're, um, and this really gets into your first home, right? Your second home, you're going to be rolling from home to home, hopefully upgrading as you go. So uh, a lot of times you need to get some money for your first home, but we'll talk about this more when we get to 401ks and some of these other things where you can, for first time home purchase, be able to get some money out of your retirement funds to help you with the down payment. So that can be useful. Typical mortgages are fixed 30s. Okay, that's just the way it works. And I'm a big proponent of that. I've always, well, in Europe, I had some variable interest and I had even a 10-year loan. But for most places, when you're trying to compare rates and things like that, fixed rate 30 is the typical mortgage. The fixed rate business that gives you the rate is not going to change. It's going to be the same on day one, as in the 30th year. The other thing about rates is if it's a little higher, let's say, things change and it goes up to 5, 6%, you can refinance and get that lowered if the rates go down. The 30-year bit, I'm a fan of the 30-year. People say, well, I just want to do a 15-year because I want to get it paid off quicker. For me, I'll take the 30 and I'll pay it off quicker as long as there's no prepayment penalty, which typically they're not. And if things, if my plan doesn't quite work off, then I just back off and I go back out to the 30. So I've got a, you know, instant ability to kind of cope with adverse situations. But if you're somebody who wants to pay it off in 15 years, I would still take the 30. Again, talk to your mortgage broker. They deal with this stuff all the time, but um, just double up if you want to do that. Home price should be no more than 2.5 times your annual. So this is very locationally dependent. If you live in San Francisco or New York or something, yeah, good luck with that. Maybe in Alaska, that might be a good rule of thumb, but I don't really see these numbers applied from mortgage people. What you need to do if you're at all considering buying a home is you need to meet. Typically, the best way to do it is with a local lender, local big mortgage company. We got Home State Residential, there's a few others out there, and go in there and get pre-approved. So you'll probably have to chunk out like $50 to get your, uh, uh, they may call it an application fee or whatever, but it's just to run your credit score, and they will let you know what the max. So these rules of thumb are nice, but what's important is what the lender uses. So 28%, yeah, that'd be nice. Monthly debt payments include should not be more than 40%. Again, the poor guy living in San Francisco, he's not he's not going to be able to do that. So in most cases, affordable down payment, closing cost, and some liquidity for unanticipated bills. So when you move into a home, you start buying garden hoses and everything else that goes along with that, and man, things add up in a hurry. But closing costs are something that rolls in there, and we're talking numbers somewhere up around 10 grand sometimes. Now a lot of times most of those will be rolled into the loan, but again, when you talk to your lender, you get pre-approved, and then you find your salesperson who you want to deal with. Sometimes for simplicity, I'll just call them real estate agent, but typically, well, by law in Alaska, we don't actually call them agents. I have an Alaska real estate license, but I've let mine lapse just because it's something you really have to apply yourself to, and it's kind of a seedier business in my mind, and I've got better options, so didn't really do it. But some people do quite well in it. I've got good friends who are still definitely involved in the real estate process. But again, which do you do first? Do you find the lender and then the agent, or do you get the agent and get the lender? Anyway, the big picture is nobody's going to sell you or show you any property. Nobody's worth their salt is going to show you property unless you're pre-approved, because if you do that, you kind of demonstrate a lack of seriousness. And also you really don't know what you can afford, and it's just hard for everybody. So you might talk to, if you've got a friend or you've got a prospective agent in mind, you might say, hey, which lender should I work with? And I would almost guarantee it's not going to be one of these out of state kind of online kind of people, because for a couple reasons. Number one, that the rates are typically competitive across the board. You shouldn't overpay much by working with somebody local, but also that agent is probably has some horror story working with some out of state lender, and they usually have people locally that they prefer to work with because it gets the home closed. Getting a home closed and getting the purchase done is not always that easy. And so you want to make sure, that you're working with an agent, a salesperson who knows this is who I do my lending with, this is who I typically do my home inspections with, title, escrow. They know, the path of least resistance, because their commissions are, they're only paid when the deal is done. And if, there's guys who have a propensity not to be able to get things done, they're not going to work with them. So anyway, okay, mortgage payment, cash flow statement. Yep, you can look at that. Rent. Um, Again, we'll talk more about those sort of decisions. I don't want to make this one go too long, but yeah, allowed for continued savings. Certainly, but again, investing in your home is a form of savings. Lessons learned. Don't go beyond the maximum. Don't buy a book. Anyway, they didn't have these cautionary tales so much in the vehicle thing, which is kind of disappointing. Home values don't rise all over time. Values can also drop, which people found out back in 2007, 2008. But again, they came back. I mean, I'm not talking investing in, some, South Florida or Phoenix or Vegas or something like that. But typically, in a normal, regular environment, you know, uh, I would put Alaska into the regular environment. Things are a little bit more stable. We're going to have a whole chapter where I'm going to talk about real estate stuff. So, but it probably is going to be the single biggest investment. But again, it's probably going to be one of the most stable investments. And also, looking at a, stock, whatever portfolio is kind of interesting, but I can't live in it. I can't have my dogs on it. So anyway, I don't mind having real estate, and I think that's how most people feel about it. Price range, decide on the price range, and identify the home you want. So again, when you're pre-approved, they're going to define sort of a max for you, and you probably will have no problem identifying the home you want. Cost of buying, cost of renting, so quite a bit to that, and mainly the tax implications. So the fact that you're uh, building equity. The if it is all close when you're looking at it, I would probably go towards buying, just because rent is going to go up with inflation, where a mortgage payment is going to be the same rate. When I was growing up, my parents had a mortgage that was 133 bucks a month, just because it was getting near the end of its 30 years. So, you know, again, back when they first bought the house, 133 bucks probably seemed like a lot of money. At the end, it was nothing. Rent would have been, thousands. So consider a condominium. Yeah, maybe. We'll talk more about that. The thing I don't like about condominiums, um, you know, I'm not trying to get into lifestyle stuff here, but especially in Alaska, some of the homeowners associations will put limits on whether you can rent your condominium, whereas you don't typically see that with homes. So, I like the freedom, and I like, if I'm having to perhaps move somewhere on short notice, I have the option of renting or selling. I'm not forced into a sales situation because I can't rent. And sometimes you see that in Alaska. Relying on an agent. If you're a buyer, it's a no-brainer. The seller pays the commission. So, basically, why would you not? Um, Online related services, these can be I'm making a little bit of money on a stock called Redfin that's going to automate this at some point. I mean, commissions are typically 6%. And so there is a lot of money that's spent on commissions. And so there is a propensity to probably to go to some lower commission format in the next 20 years or so, but it certainly hasn't happened yet. But for right now, things like Zillow and some of those other services, their valuations and other things many times are out to lunch, or they don't reflect things like, oh, this one doesn't, this particular lot doesn't get any sun, or this lot's in an avalanche zone, or whatever. There's a lot of things where having an agent can definitely save you. Criteria, so location, maintenance, school system, taxes, homeowner association. That's a personal decision. Personally, I'm not a fan. Other people love them. We'll talk more about this as we go. But you have to look at this not as if you're specifically buying the home for yourself and I don't care about the schools because I don't have kids or something like that. That's not a good system. What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to make a house or make buy something that's most attractive to the average buyer, and so that's what's going to keep the value up. I also try to buy on the edge of things, but that's just me. But I like to be, on a river or on the side. I don't want to be buried in the middle of a neighborhood. But anyway, we'll talk more about that later. Uh, Valuation of a home. So many times, yeah, they do. I mean, I talked to a friend. He was quoting me prices for Eagle River based on the price per square foot, which totally was, divorced from the size of the lot, where it's located. I anyway, there's too many other factors for me, but a lot of times that's what they'll do. And then if you go with an appraiser, they're just typically looking at comparable sales, so their values can be pretty accurate if you're in the middle of a subdivision and there's 5, 10 other homes that have sold recently that are almost identical to it. But if you've kind of got a one-off, that's something that makes your house unique, it's very difficult to provide an accurate appraisal. So here they're doing it just by square footage. Again, they're talking square foot of the living space, not the lot, not the location, a lot of other things. We all know that the economy can affect it. So, we talk about a buyer's market, a seller's market. But if there's no demand, if interest rates all of a sudden spike, people can't afford houses, home prices are going to drop. So that's what they're showing here. Weak economy, you know, this would be a buyer's market. This would be a seller's market. Impact of the financial crisis. Lesson learned, again, I'm not sure if these folks would have had that in the slides that home values can go down. Most people prior to this thought that home values would only go up. They might go flat for a while, but when they actually saw a decline in some of those markets I mentioned, that really kind of shook them up a bit. Correcting the mortgage application process, it's always in flux. Politicians want to make it very easy for people to get loans. And so, it kind of takes two. It's not just the predatory lenders, but it's also, some elements within the government want to make the loan process easy. And then it goes to the other extreme where they tighten up the loan process and nobody can afford things or nobody will lend money. So they have a problem with moderation in most things. Business activities and zoning laws, kind of like a homeowners association. Um, I can tell you in Anchorage, there wasn't a home around me or in Eagle River that did not have a violation, and the code enforcement people were, uh, anyway. Um, Yeah, they had a lot of laws, but they didn't have a lot of enforcement. Second opinion on your valuation. So this is a scary thing. I mean, you can. It's not rocket science. These folks go in there and they look at comps. They call them comparable sales, and so you know you can also kind of figure out what homes are going for in your neighborhood or in your prospective neighborhood and see where that goes. But the appraisal process, usually that's a little too late in the process. Homes tend to appraise for what the loan amount is, and it's and people, like to hear that, oh, the house appraised, but there's not really much of a check to it because those appraisals, they know what you're offered for the house. So when they have that data and go figure, it comes up to exactly that number. Kind of difficult. Negotiating a price. So this again gets back to that pre-approval. If I got, let's say I'm selling a home for 300,000 and I get a full price offer, somebody offers me 300,000, but they're not qualified, they haven't gone through the paperwork for to get their loan, and somebody else offers me 295, but they've already got a 90% letter or whatever, a letter that reflects that the bank will give them a loan. I'd go with the lower price one just because there's a higher propensity that deal's going to go through, and so that's not that unusual. You're not in a good bargaining position um, if you don't have the means. Now, if you do, if you've got good credit and again, based on the information, I've never paid full price for a home. I've always negotiated, and there's offer, counter offer, all the rest of that. It's kind of nerve wracking, but it will get you a better price in most cases. Okay, we talked about some of these. FHA, VA, can do PMI, private mortgage insurance. Hopefully, you won't have to keep it very long. You'll either pay until you get the equity. Once you get the equity, either the home appreciates or you pay into the mortgage. You get more than the 20%, then you cancel your PMI and you're done with it. Closing costs. So loan application fee, they're showing a little bit more. Typically, that those fees may come in later, but the application, or at least to get a pre-approval, is typically around $50. Points, kind of a weird concept. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but you can buy down an interest rate by paying points, which is a goofy concept. I've never done it. I've never had a customer want to do it, so I'm not going to spend much time on it. Loan origination fee, appraisal fees, title search. Anyway, all these things, next thing you know, you're up at about 10 grand. So, because you've got commission in there also if you were the seller. Some are buyer's costs, some are seller's costs. They'll split them up, and anyway, your agent can sort all that out for you. Fixed rate. Fixed rate is just, especially post 2007, it's just more controllable. The interest rates. I had loans that were down in the 2 point something percent in Europe, but they were variable, and so if things went south, those rates could have jumped up. Um, Amortization table. This just tells you how your payments are going to be, how they're going to be split up in terms of interest and principal. Principal is the actual money, that's being paid towards the house, towards the purchase. Take out a $300,000 loan, $300,000 worth of principal needs to be paid off. But the loan, it's going to be scary, but it's going to be like 700 grand because 400 grand of interest, even a low interest rate. But go figure, over 30 years, it takes a while. So this is where I'm saying where the numbers are more dramatic. See the principal here, he's only paying 120 bucks in principal that first year. Here at the end of the 30 years, he's paying 534 and only $3 interest. Here he's paying 417. So this big number though is this 417 would be deductible on your income taxes. That's where you see people saying, I think I need to buy something new because I no longer have a tax deduction. People use different logic, but um, that's what they're talking about when they say that. Impacted the mortgage amount on, well, yeah, that shouldn't be surprising. And go figure, neither should that. So, but these interest rates, they can have a pretty dramatic effect, you know. Um, and that's why there's always, when it goes down, let's say a percent, when the prevailing rate is down maybe a percent lower than your actual loan rate, it makes sense to refinance if possible. Same sort of numbers, principal paid, you know, very high in the last year, low, and here's not much principal, but quite a bit of interest. Another graphic of that. Same. I saw this taken to extreme when I was in Spain. They were they were setting themselves up for a fall, which happened. But anyway, while I was there, things were still going up, and they were taking out 60-year mortgages. Well beyond the life expectancy of the person taking out the loan. It was just kind of a farce. More numbers. I think we're made the point. Estimating monthly mortgage. So keep in mind that the online calculators are usually a little bit better now because they'll also factor in payments such as insurance and also property taxes, which you're going to be paying. So, let's say you've got a payment, it's a loan company of say $2,100. Your mortgage is probably down around, $1,700, and that other, $400 or $500 is the property tax and insurance. Bankrate.com if you want to compare interest rates, but again, you know, typically if you can get them close locally, you're going to be far better off. So this is what I was talking about with the interest rates changing. They don't even have below 4%. We are in such phenomenal times in terms of low interest rate. My loan is down in the three something range, and my higher one is at 4%. But you can see that the extreme, if you get up to 8%, your payment goes up to 734, whereas less than $500 if it's at 4%. So you end up pricing people out of the market. If the interest rates go up, there's a segment of buyers who can no longer afford to be in the market, and so um, it lessens demand and prices come down. One more chart. ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages. So I mentioned this. Typically, they're going to be a lower rate, but they can go up. And if I can get a 30-year fixed at a low interest rate down in the threes, I'm not even going to mess with an ARM. Usually, ARMs are when interest rates are higher, they're forecast hopefully to go down, and you can't afford the house any other way, and you're taking a chance that if the rates go even higher, you're going to be even more in a bad spot. But they're typically indexed that says something that they can only go up, say, 0.5% per year, so they can't double, in any short time, but just the same. Not nearly as popular as they once were. Caps on adjustable rate mortgages, so that's what they're talking about, limits the fluctuations. Own versus buy, we'll talk more about that, but renting is, again, it depends on the time, length of time you're going to be there, but you know, you are tying up a little bit of money with your payment, security deposit. Owning, you have all these other costs, but some of which are tax deductible. Special types, we're not going to spend much time on this. These are usually for short-term financing, just to get in the loan. A lot of these creative things, now that people have realized that real estate isn't always an appreciating asset, it'd be tough to find a balloon payment anymore. Interest only mortgages, these are people who were, you know, not even touching the principal, just paying the interest. They weren't planning on keeping the home for very long. They were going to flip it again. Not very common. Refinancing, so shop around for these. I was offered by my original lender to say, hey, do you want to refinance? And I checked with somebody else, and the rate was literally 1% lower. But at least they kind of tipped me off and reminded me that I should be thinking about refinancing. But I definitely did not go with that company. It's a competitive market out there. You got to make sure that your person that you're working with has access to typically multiple banks to get the best rate possible. And that's it. So I'll put the video out there, also put the example out there, some of the more car related stuff. Automotive will be the video this week. Again, if people have questions, I'll try and answer them in the emails, but um, I'll try and also take care of it in the lecture as well to get a little broader information out there. Till next week.